Greetings, Gen Chem students. In this spectroscopy lab video, we're going to observe and characterize the emission spectra from two different types of light sources. And those two different types of light sources are an incandescent light bulb, like this one. This is a big one, but an incandescent light bulb. What is an incandescent light bulb? You have a filament in there. You run an electric current through it. As the electric current runs through that little filament, the filament gets really hot. It gets so hot that it starts to glow. You know, like 600-700 degrees, it'll start to glow red. Hotter yet, it'll start to glow green or blue, whatever. But that's an incandescent light. It produces light through heat. It heats a piece of matter until that piece of matter, that piece of bulk matter, begins to glow. You know, think of an ember in a fireplace or in a campfire. It's glowing red because of its temperature. That's an incandescent light bulb. So we're going to look at the light spectra from an incandescent light bulb, and also the light spectra from a gas discharge tube filled with hydrogen. This is a hydrogen gas discharge tube, and it's a glass tube that's been evacuated, all the air pulled out, and then the air was replaced with hydrogen gas. And now there are electrodes at both ends, and you put this into a source of electrical energy, and you give it a big electrical pump. And the electrical energy breaks apart the hydrogen atoms and kicks the hydrogen atoms up into higher energy states. And as those individual atoms drop back down to lower energy states, they shed or they get rid of that excess energy by emitting photons of light, by producing light. And that's what produces the light in an in a gas discharge tube. So we're going to compare the light spectra from an incandescent bulb and a gas discharge tube. Now, we're going to use a diffraction slide to separate the light into its different wavelength color components. This is a diffraction slide, and it's a piece of clear plastic, but there are little tiny lines that are embossed on that clear plastic. I mean, literally thousands of lines embossed on that plastic. As a matter of fact, you can read this here, and it says there are 13,400 grooves or lines per inch. And this is about an inch across. So there are more than 13,000 lines embossed on that piece of plastic. Now, as the light passes through that plastic, those grooves create slits, and as the light passes through those thousands of parallel lines, the different colors, the different wavelengths of the light are diffracted. And what is diffraction? Diffraction is the flaring out or the bending out of light as it passes through narrow slits. And all these thousands of lines create these thousands of little slits, and as the light passes through, each different wavelength is diffracted, is bent, is flared out. And it turns out that different wavelengths will flare out at larger or smaller angles than other wavelengths. And it turns out that long wavelengths of light will have a larger angle of diffraction than shorter wavelengths of light. And so let's look at a diagram of this. And I'm going to pause this. So what we're showing here is illustrating this idea of diffraction. And you can think of, let's see where I can get that in there. I'm trying to do this backwards. Right here, let's say that this is a beam of white light here with all the different colors of light, red, blue, green, yellow, and it's heading towards this slit, this very narrow slit. As it passes through that slit, the different colors are going to be angled out, flared out, bent out at different angles. And notice that the red light, with its longer wavelength, has a larger angle of diffraction, a larger angle of being flared out, an angle relative to this straight line here. And blue light, with about 400 nanometers, because it's a shorter wavelength, will be flared out at a shorter, smaller angle. So this effectively produces a way, or provides a way, an avenue for us to separate all the different color components, all the different wavelength components in a light source, as you send them through a diffraction slide, and we can separate the different colors, different wavelengths, and get the spectrum of that particular light source. Okay, now let's look at the appearance of the light spectrum from an incandescent light bulb. Remember, that is light produced by taking a bulk piece of matter, heating it up to such a high temperature that it starts to glow. And so this is the spectrum as the light passes through a diffraction slide, or as it would pass through a prism, that would also break the light up into its different color components. And what we see here is a continuous spectrum. It's called continuous because there is a continuous, excuse me, this is not state of the art, because there's a continuous smooth band of colors from blue to red. Notice that there are no breaks in this swath of color. There's just a smooth continuation of one color flowing into another color. The light is continuous across all the wavelengths. There's no break in the wavelengths as you go from one end to the other. And this is just what scientists expected to see in a light source way back in 1900. And why did they expect to see this? Because the old physics, before quantum mechanics came along, the old physics said that energy was a continuous variable, a continuous phenomenon. And light is a form of energy, therefore light should be continuous. And that's what this is showing us, that the light from an incandescent bulb is indeed continuous. But that's okay, now let's look at, we have the continuous spectrum up there, but now we've also added the spectrum from a hydrogen gas discharge tube, and that would be the lower spectrum that you see there. And that is called, not a continuous spectrum, but it's called a line spectrum for obvious reasons, because what we see are just a few distinct, discrete lines of very specific wavelength of light. We see a line spectrum. This was completely unexpected in 1900. And it turns out that the physics of the day back in 1900 could not explain this line spectrum. It was a mystery. But it did seem to be implying that energy was not a continuous variable, because the energy is not continuous across all the different wavelengths. Just a few discrete wavelengths of light are visible or showing up. So the old physics could not explain this. A new physics was going to be required in order to explain this. And that is what quantum mechanics was. It was the new physics that came on the scene around 1900 and was able to explain this line spectrum. And in the process, it revealed the internal structure of atoms, which allows us to understand, explain, and predict the properties of all the atoms in nature. And that's what we're studying right now in this class. But what we're going to do now, oh, well, one other thing before we do that, I'm going to pause this again. Okay, what we can actually do with these diffraction scopes and this diffraction phenomenon is to diffract the light against a scale that will allow us to put a numerical value to the wavelengths of the light. And notice what we have here. Notice that the red line in the hydrogen gas discharge tube is around 650 nanometers in wavelength. And the blue light way down on the other end is about 400 and something. And so we can apply, we can actually measure the wavelengths of the different light, the different energies of light that are emitted by different light sources, including gas discharge tubes. And so this is the hydrogen spectrum, the hydrogen emission spectrum. And what you'll need to do for your lab is to look where these lines are, find the corresponding wavelength, and then use that in your calculations for your lab. And I'm going to post this set of slides with the continuous and line spectra and this scale on D2L under the, along with the lab protocol for the spectroscopy lab, so you can do that more precisely. But what we're going to do now is pause this and then actually try to physically, experimentally look at the the continuous spectrum of a light bulb, an incandescent light, and the line spectrum of hydrogen. So let's pause this. Okay, this is going to be pretty funky because I have to be in a room where there's no external light, and we're in my bathroom. As a matter of fact, one of our bathrooms, it doesn't have any windows, and I have the incandescent light here. I'm going to turn it on, and then we're going to see if we can see the spectrum of this. And hold on just a second here. And what I'm going to do is tape this this diffraction slide over my computer's camera so that it's looking at this incandescent light through this set of thousands of slits, and so it's going to diffract the light. And we'll see if we see the continuous spectrum here. Let me. Okay, so I have the, oops. Hold on again, gotta pause this. Okay, as I said, this is really funky. We don't have high-tech equipment here. This is really doing it by the seat of your pants, bubble gum, and Scotch tape or things. You know, it's really pretty crude, but we'll see if it works. So now the camera on my computer, the lens is covered with the diffraction slide, and here is the light source over there, and there is the continuous spectrum. It's not real clear, but you can, hopefully, you guys can see it. You got to get it just right. Can you see the band of colors across there? Red goes into yellow to green to blue, and that is a continuous spectrum. Again, just what physicists, scientists expected to see back in 1900, and they're all high-fiving one another because they're so smart and they have it all figured out that energy must be a continuous variable, period. But that is an incandescent bulb. Okay, so now we're going to look at the hydrogen gas discharge tube. Now, in this case, the light is produced not by a bulk piece of matter that's being heated, but by individual atoms. So the energy that you see, the light you see, is literally being created by the individual atoms. So let's see if we can see the spectrum. And there it is. There's three distinct colors there. There's blue and green and the red. You can't see the red. I can see it. But the camera, I guess it's just not very sensitive to longer wavelengths of light. But notice that we have not a continuous range of colors of wavelengths of light, but just a few discrete colors. Actually, only three. This blue, this green, and red. And so voila, that's that. Let's go back to the continuous one. And there's the continuous one again, very different looking than the line spectrum. And again, this line spectrum was completely unexpected. There was no way to explain this in terms of the old physics. A whole new physics had to be created in order to explain this. And in the process of explaining that, they created the new science of quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics opened the door for us to look inside and see the internal structure of atoms. And that's that. So that's the end of our lab videos. And I'm going to pause this, and I'm going to record it, and then I'm going to post it on D2L. And that'll be it.